So Games Workshop's just dropped some rules and stats for the new Primaris Desolation Squad. Let's see what these fancy new missile launchers can kill. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're talking Primaris Space Marine rules, and I thought it would be interesting to talk through the weapon profiles that Games Workshop's just dropped for these new Primaris Desolation Squad Marines, the ones that are coming in Strike Force Agastus with the fancy missile launchers. Let's take a look through the weapon profiles, what they might incentivise the unit to do on the board, and roughly how much damage you might expect out of them against a few likely targets with their barrage and direct line of sight weapons. As we talked about in the last video, these guys are going to be coming out in the Strike Force Agastus box set. That one comes out this week, £120, €155 or $200, pre-ordering on the 25th of February, alongside the Brutalis Dreadnought and a few other bits and bobs. The Desolation Squad are basically the Primaris version of the Devastators. Missile launcher are Marines with an underslung Gatling rocket launcher and a couple of missile tubes on top. They've got standard Intercessor style bodies and a signum mounted on their backpack. Reactions online to these miniatures have been a little bit unfavourable, perhaps the main criticism just being that the missile launchers look like they're a bit of a weird combination of two very different guns mounted on the same model. Still though, kind of interesting to see what these missile launchers can actually do in game when you point them in the general direction of the enemy and fire. First up, we've got the stats on the Superfrag and Supercrack rockets. And in the article, Games Workshop have confirmed one thing for them, that you can't mix and match the different missiles and swap between the two in-game as you can with lots of other missile launchers in 40k. I think this one was kind of implied by the models. The smaller missiles are indeed the Super Frag rockets, and the bigger missiles are the Super Crack rockets, as you can see from these pictures. So it does mean that the squad basically has two different loadouts that you can set them up with, if you either want an anti-infantry or anti-tank support piece. I guess at least game-wise it does mean that the rules for the missiles can be a bit more focused. A fair bit of the time with missile launchers in 40k's history, both profiles have just tended to be a bit underwhelming, as they can't make them super strong at either one of their roles, as their strength is being generalist. It does mean that having to select these pre-game does mean that you could have them quite focused and quite good at their respective jobs. For the profiles for the main guns, the Super Frag missile is 48 inches, heavy D3+3, strength 4, AP-1 and damage 1. I think that's pretty much as rumoured. Pretty dedicated anti-infantry there, is probably going to be happiest at shooting down things like Imperial Guardsmen that are toughness 3 and have some save. Really though, I suspect that the more impressive of the two is generally going to be those Super Crack rockets. They're just a single shot at strength 8, AP 3 and damage D3+3. Really quite big hitting anti-tank shots, and the AP is actually a bit better than I might have expected. I wouldn't have been too surprised if they were AP-2 given other missile launchers. They really do seem like an anti-tank shot that you just really can't ignore, though we'll get on to comparing the two missiles in just a second. Otherwise though, the Sergeant gets something called a Vengor launcher instead of either the Super Frag or Super Crack. We don't know whether he can take the regular missiles or he has to swap for this, and we also don't know whether or not this would cost additional points or not. If not, then it does seem like a pretty nice weapon though. The Vengor launcher, which I must admit is a bit of a weird name, has a 48-inch range, heavy D6, strength 6, AP-3 and damage 2. It does seem to be a similar kind of profile to the Whirlwind's Vengeance launcher. I guess they've named it to be kind of similar but not quite the same to avoid confusion. The gun gets to ignore line of sight and gets the blast keyword. And overall, for a gun that's just mounted on one single Space Marine model, this really is quite a big threat. Kind of crazy how similar it is to the entire profile of the Whirlwind's Vengeance launcher. That one gets 2d3 shots at strength 7 and -1, 2 damage. The Vengeance launcher is a bit better, but not by an enormous amount. This guy's packing about as much firepower as an entire Whirlwind. The profile's fairly generalist. It's going to be pretty handy against anything with light infantry or 2 wound infantry there. The AP isn't exactly enormous though, particularly given the general 40k nerf to barrage weapons at the moment, where enemies get a +1 to their saves and -1 to hit out of line of sight. Overall, this just seems like a very helpful weapon to have on the battlefield. Just chip away a bit at the unit that you most need dead, even if you can't see it. The other rule that the Sergeant has is that they've got a signum targeting system of some sort. Games Workshop were a bit vague about this, but they said that it guides the squad's aim. This would imply to me, particularly with the signum rules for the Devastator, that it might well be a +1 to hit, maybe unit-wide. The exact wording on that could matter quite a bit. If it's just a +1 to their ballistic skill unit-wide, then it's great. It might have some basic restrictions on though. It might be that it's got to nominate one target unit that the squad can see, or it might just be for the direct fire weapons and not the barrage weapons, for example. Still though, sounds like this is going to be a unit-wide buff of some sort, probably going to make them more accurate. Finally, as well as the primary weapon for the squad, they all get an underslung Castellan missile launcher as well. This one's the rotary belt-fed one, and this is also an ignores line of sight firepower attack. The profile on these are 36 inches, heavy D3, strength 4, AP-1, damage 1 and blast, and also they ignore line of sight. It means that a squad of 5 of these will be chipping in around about 10 shots at that profile against the infantry unit of your choice. Good to have a little bit of AP on that seems to be better than the leaks that we had, and it's potentially looking really quite efficient against anything that's got 6 or more models in the squad, say for example Imperial Guardsmen again. You'd be getting the max 3 shots out of all of those Castellan launchers, meaning that you get quite a big damage boost. In the article, Games Workshop did confirm as well that the Castellan launcher can be targeted at different things to the main guns, so it means that you could basically have a squad that's firing half of its weapons as barrage weapons, and the other half at direct fire at the enemy units that you can see. An interesting sort of mixed damage proposition. Just to run some numbers for some interest, I thought we'd see the barrage damage output and then the direct fire damage output, all of this from the same squad. And for the barrage, we've got the Vengor launcher firing with 5 Castellan launchers. A squad of 5 of these was rumoured to be 175 points. Realistically, it could be more or less, but it seems plausible. And here are some just rough numbers for what you might expect from the barrage attack. For these numbers, I've assumed that there's no sort of benefit from the Signum array. I know it'll help out somehow, but seeing as we don't know what yet, it seems a bit premature to put it in. In general though, basically with the Castellan missiles, they're just a lot better against 1 wound infantry than anything armoured. You average 5 dead guardsmen, around about 1 dead space marine, and 1 wound dealt to a Terminator squad. Those numbers would go up a bit by 33% if the Signum array gives the whole squad a +1 to hit. Realistically though, this squad's going to be the sort of squad that you can get some decent buffs going for. Say for example, if you run them with Iron Hand's Devastator Doctrine, that'll get you extra AP and reroll 1s to hit. That'll put your numbers up decently to around about 7 dead guardsmen, 1 or 2 dead space marines, or around 2 wounds dealt to Terminators. It's still a lot more efficient against light infantry than heavies, but the damage output is at least a bit more meaningful against things like standard space marines. Again, the Signum array might yield a bit more. With kind of low AP across the unit though, I think they're just going to be a lot more efficient if you are playing an army that's wanting to sit in Devastator Doctrine all game long. That's not all they do though, as well as chipping away with that sort of firepower as barrage weapons, they'd also be firing directly if you could see things. And these are just the numbers for the missile launchers for the main squad, 4 Superfrag missile launchers versus 4 Super Crack missiles. In terms of winning damage output, the Superfrag missiles only win against the guardsmen out of these profiles, but they are very decently ahead here, around about triple the Super Crack, and they will be ahead on just about any 1 wound infantry that you can target. If you're firing against 2 wound things with reasonable saves though, then the Super Crack missiles are going to be a lot better, averaging around about 2 dead space marines, 1 or 2 Terminators, 7 or 8 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle, and 3.5 to a hard target like toughness 8 with -1 damage and a 5+ invul. The numbers are kind of close when you're targeting standard space marines, but anything 3 wounds or above seems to swing pretty heavily to the Super Crack. Overall, just in terms of potential points killed here, I feel like the Super Crack does seem to have the edge. If they cost the same amount of points, those would be the missiles that I'd be more tempted to go for. Perhaps particularly because the entire squad gets locked into the Castellan launchers anyway, so they're always going to have at least a decent amount of threat against light infantry. Unless you're really expecting to see no heavy targets whatsoever, I feel like the Super Crack's probably going to be the way to go if they do cost the same points. Overall, obviously it's a bit of an early take when we don't have the complete rules or points cost yet, but I'd guess given the stats that we've had revealed so far, they're going to be at least reasonably expensive in points for all that firepower and the premium that you usually pay for barrage fire. I'd guess that the models are going to be really quite fragile for the points, guys that are going to hang out towards the back of your army and get killed quite quickly for their cost if the enemy manages to get any guns to fire at them. I feel like these are going to be quite an interesting unit, at least on paper, for the Space Marine army. If they do work out as being quite good, then certainly a bit of barrage fire is a real asset to an army. Even if the raw damage output isn't enormously great, just being able to do things like finish off important last wounds of infantry units clinging to objectives, or just ruin a fragile infantry unit that deal loads of damage but you can't see it yet, both of those could be pretty massive, particularly against armies that quite like to hide out of line of sight, like say Eldar or maybe Sisters of Battle Repentia perhaps. It looks like they're going to be a unit that's far better in certain chapters. Iron Hand certainly seems excellent with being able to move and shoot, rerolls and AP from Devastator Doctrine. Perhaps other interesting chapters might be Dark Angels, as they can stay stationary sat at the back, plus they might want to be in Devastator Doctrine anyway for the Raven Wing. Imperial Fists with their Ignore cover and Devastator Doctrine seem interesting enough as well, +1 damage on those super cracks against vehicles seems good, and perhaps Ultramarines could be interesting enough as well, being able to move and fire in their tactical doctrine, and just generally having a fair few support characters going around for some big rerolls. Being big guns that sit at the back and don't always need line of sight on the opponent means that character rerolls are generally going to be quite easy to find for them. Certainly full Chapter Master rerolls could be interesting with the barrage weapons and help counteract the penalty that you take for firing out of line of sight. My suspicion is that they'd probably need to get at least some value from both the barrage guns and the direct fire weapons. I suspect that they'll be probably a bit expensive to go for pure barrage fire and just hit hidden all game, though I guess you could do that for the first turn or two, and then maybe step out into the open for a volley of the proper rockets turn 3, when you really need to break the back of the opponent in terms of the damage game. It does mean that unlike things that are a bit more focused, like say Imperial Guard mortar teams, they can't just sit hidden out of line of sight all game long. I think they do need to be doing a bit of both. Let me know your thoughts on the rules though. How strong are these guys looking now we know some weapon profiles? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly try and keep up with Games Workshop's news and rumours. If you'd like to see a bit more of a complete overview of the Strike Force Agastus box that I posted earlier in the day, I'll leave that linked down in the video description below. I talk over the units within and the prices. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel quite a bit, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.